You know, if they made a prequel, it would be called Shallow Concern. Welcome to Obscure Old Games. I'm retrogaming Puppet, and it is once again October, and you know what that means. Now, this year it so happens that Capcom released the long-awaited remake of Resident Evil 2, which means that it is the perfect time for me to discuss Sega's answer to RE2, Deep Fear. I briefly touched on this game in an episode of 5 Reasons a few years ago, but it's high time it got an episode all to itself. Honestly, that this game remains appropriate for this show is something of a crime, since to look at it, it's very clear that not only did it begin development with the West in mind, but also that Sega spent a boatload of money on it. Full voice acting in English, tons of CG cutscenes, lavish environments, a variety of creatures, a score composed by the guy who wrote the music for Ghost in the Shell and The Ring. This was meant to be Sega's Resident Evil killer, and it never hit North America, one of, if not the, largest video game markets on Earth. And why? Well, that one's easy. Because of Sega of America Chief Operating Officer at the time, Bernie Stolar. In an interview from the September 1997 issue of Electronic Gaming Monthly, he said the following.
Saturn's not our future.
But forget about the game not getting its chance in North America. Is it any good? Or is it simply a relic of the 5th generation, made for a system that infamously wasn't even meant to do 3D until the 11th hour? A game better consigned to the dustbin of video game curiosities. Deep Fear was developed by Sega AM7, otherwise known as Overworks, and released in 1998, both in Japan as well as Europe, where it was the final game released for the system, and, as mentioned, was extremely ambitious. The game puts you in the shoes of one John Mayer. No, not that John Mayer.
Chief!
This John Mayer is head of a rescue team in an undersea research facility called the Big Table. It's a civilian facility, but adjacent to a naval research facility that's working on weapons. The story kicks off when what looks to be an escape pod re-enters the atmosphere from space and crash lands in the ocean nearby. The facility's submarine, the Sea Fox, sets off to recover the object, which has some sort of space pathogen in it that starts mutating the crew into monsters. While Capcom was clearly influenced by George Romero's Dead films, Sega was drawing on a combination of James Cameron's The Abyss and John Carpenter's The Thing. I mean, just look at this first creature transformation. It's obvious, ain't it? So John and one of his team members, Mookie, the resident baseball fan, take the facility's smaller sub, the Little Shark, over to investigate, and they find, well, yeah, monsters, obviously. I don't want to get too into the story because this game is obscure enough that what happens isn't well trodden despite the game being over 20 years old, but rest assured, it's a bit different than what you come to expect from Resident Evil. It's also different from the early entries in that series in that it is much more action-oriented, even more than Resident Evil 2, which was considerably more action-packed than RE1. It's tempting to call Deep Fear a survival horror game because of its similarities to Capcom's 800-pound horror gorilla, but that's not entirely accurate. See, ammo is technically limited in terms of what you can take with you, but there are weapons lockers everywhere that dispense as much ammo as you can carry whenever you visit them. Similarly, there are first aid kits with seemingly endless healing items. So, in general, it's less about the resource and inventory management, and more about dealing with monsters and moving the story forward. Alongside plentiful ammo, the game also makes a couple of concessions that people clamored for from RE from the get-go. First, you can move and shoot, which isn't something that's ever really bothered us in Resident Evil games, but if you've always wanted that in a classic RE title, well, it's in Deep Fear. Second, I'm told that if you have one of the Saturn 3D controllers, the ones that came bundled with Nights into Dreams, you can turn off the tank controls, although that's also not something that's ever really bugged us much. I don't have a Saturn 3D pad, so I couldn't confirm this, but I have no reason to doubt it. One other thing I love about this game that defies the Resident Evil formula is the lack of obtuse puzzles. There are no crests, no jewels, none of that stuff. There are keys with clear labels, and maybe a couple puzzles that require reading something or putting together a very basic riddle. Like, you need a code that only this one guy knew. Good thing he had a random item on his corpse with a number written on it. That kind of stuff. The story moves forward in this game by killing monsters and getting stuff around the various locations working, most notably, the air system. See, you can die two ways in Deep Fear. The normal way of being killed by creatures, or by running out of air. While you do get a small rebreather, it only slows the oxygen consumption, either when you're underwater or in a room with no air. You need to either drain the rooms full of water or reactivate the air filtration system, which you can also use to recharge your rebreather. You also get oxygen grenades, which will give you more time until the air runs out and hurt the mutated staff, who hate fresh air and try to sabotage the oxygen system. Now, I like this game quite a bit, but obviously it is not completely without its flaws. For as interesting as the enemy designs are, and they are interesting, from a gameplay perspective they tend to be a bit bland. They just sort of lumber towards you until you kill them, and that goes for pretty much all types. Imagine if in Resident Evil the hunters or lickers looked like they do, but they still kinda acted like zombies. Sort of dull, right? Another thing is that the boss fights aren't the best, which they often aren't in classic Resident Evil either, but it's a lot of kiting them around until you have enough space to shoot at them, and then kite them around some more, shoot some more, etc, etc. Also, for as impressive as this game is for the time, the voice acting is terrible. Forget about worse than Resident Evil 2, this might be worse than the original Resident Evil. And on top of that, we've got that old chestnut of the 90s. A really terrible gay panic character.
I asked Dubois, the designer, to come too.
Oh, there's no problem with my CFOX system. No accident should have occurred. Oh!
We can't get through on the wireless.
Ugh, yikes. I mean, I feel like that was cringy in 1998, but 2019? Oh, wow.
Oh, what am I gonna do?
But still, even with those flaws, Deep Fear is a fantastic game. Is it as good as the top tier Resident Evils? No, it's not. But is it better than the lower tier ones? Absolutely. And if you're a fan of the genre, you owe it to yourself to check this game out. It's just too bad that the version that got a full English localization costs a minor fortune. Being the final PAL release on the Saturn, this game has reached near mythic status. And that version, when it even pops up, can sell for close to $400 on eBay. Fortunately, the Japanese version is almost entirely in English, to the point that just a glance here and there at an FAQ will easily set you on your way, and that version can be had for about 20 bucks, maybe a little more depending on the condition. But the real tragedy here is that this game is stuck on such a relatively niche system. I, for one, would love to see M2 give it the Sega Aegis treatment on modern systems. But yeah, that does it for me for another Halloween. But make sure to come back before All Hallows Eve, because Joe is going to be back with a big episode of Same Name, Different Game, and, well, let's just say we didn't just pick Deep Fear out of the hat for this installment of Oog. I'm Roger the Retro Gaming Puppet. Have a happy Halloween. Hey folks, it's Joe, and thanks so much for watching. If you like what you saw, I hate to ask, but please do all the things. Think about it like this. I'll say trick or treat, and instead of candy, you give me a like, comment, subscribe, and you ring the stupid bell. Okay? Trick or treat. And hey, if you really like the show, consider supporting on Patreon. It keeps the shows ad-free and gets you early access to new episodes. If you want more spooky stuff, the full Halloween playlist is on the left. And if you just want more Halloween Roger specifically, this year's 5 Reasons Halloween episode is on the right.